people, jump up with my people, wave up with my people, get on bad with my people. I consider all your my people, jump up with my people.
Welcome back to the Now Morning Show. It's 6 minutes past the hour of 7 o'clock, and our next conversation is about an HR audit. Yes, you heard right. And joining us this morning in studio to enlighten us and have some engaging conversations is Richard Solomon, the Managing Director of the Development Consulting Center. Good morning, Richard, and welcome back.
Good morning to you. Thank you.
How are you doing this morning?
Good, up a little bit earlier than planned, but it's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
And you know what? This is a conversation that may just start a little bit of transformation that we do need.
Let's see. Yeah.
So, first of all, what is a HR audit?
Well, an audit of anything is a comparison of what actually exists to what should exist. So it's a measurement against a standard. In this case, what we would be doing is measuring HR practices, HR procedures, HR policies. Are they up to what the standards are, essentially?
But is it actually a thing, HR auditing?
Yeah. It's a
It
thing.
is?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, is it implemented?
Many organizations do.
Okay.
So here's what we've found. What we've found is many organizations, when they do their audit, their financial audit, they will tack on a little piece to look at some elements of HR. So usually it's compliance. Are we keeping records the way we're supposed to? Are we dealing with people's leave and documentation and those kinds of things? Is it transparent how we do what we do? Those kinds of things. Not always as deep as it should go, but some organizations do it, yeah.
Okay, so this sounds also like a bit of accountability is coming into play.
Yeah.
So, how popular would you say this is?
Not very popular in this part of the world, I have found. So I'll give you a case. A few years ago, an organization reached out to us. They had some really difficult challenges. They were hacked and their systems were held to ransom and so on. And people were sent on leave and all kinds of things. And then they asked for audits. So they did a forensic audit of their IT systems, of course. They did a financial one, and they asked for an HR audit. And some of the things we found were very startling. So it's not popular, but consider this. HR is like the water that touches all the land. If you think about it, in the organization, HR does everything.
Right.
HR hires people, and then the people do. The people maintain the systems, the people create the systems, they serve the customers, they do everything. So how you manage this resource, and we do say it, the people are our most important resource. But how you manage the resource has an implication or has implications for how the entire organization functions. Everything in the organization, including the finance, which we always audit.
Right, yeah.
Right? But the people part, that's not so popular.
It's not popular. And, just going off of this conversation here and speaking about the fact that we were talking off air as well, HR is for the people. I mean, there are a lot of people who will sit down and say, well, HR isn't really for me. HR is for upper management and to protect the entity. So how do you even begin to implement something like that and bring faith from people into the conversation?
Right.
Because,
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have to back up a little bit.
Yeah.
There is now a taxonomy, if you want, for HR. So there is a framework for HR governance.
Okay.
How we should manage HR. It's no longer that we're guessing. Any HR practitioner worth their salt, they know all the components and they know all the standards. And so if you have a taxonomy, then to your question, there's a realization that HR is not or should not be for the organization or for the people. HR is for all stakeholders. Right. If HR works based on the taxonomy that is set up and the governance framework, if you want, that is set up, then it will do what is in the best interest of all stakeholders. Now, sometimes that's difficult. But if you embed principles in there, so we're working not for you or me, but we're working towards the principles and the values that the organization has, then it becomes easier. It becomes more transparent. It gets really difficult when people don't want to play by the rules. And when I say people, I'm talking about both sides, whether it be employers or employees. If we don't want to play by the rules, then we'll always see HR as being somebody else's support. So for example, if a CEO is about to make a decision in hiring that, or is giving an instruction, we should hire this person, HR should say, yeah, but how do you know?
Yeah.
There is a process that we must walk through that is part of the taxonomy that helps us to be able to decide, is this the best person that we can find for that role? So it really should not be that. And wherever you see that, it's either one of two things. People are running afoul themselves and they don't want to be told the truth.
Yeah.
Or, in fact, sometimes you do have HR practitioners who are leaning way too far towards the employer and away from the employees.
So with the HR audit, we're seeing benefits of accountability,
Yeah.
transparency.
Yeah.
What other benefits would an organization experience from this?
So to answer that question, we have to ask, what are we auditing? So we've conducted comprehensive HR audits, for example. Everything HR, your processes, your systems, your policies, and most importantly, your practices. Because you can write any policy, but of course, you don't have to be practicing according to that, right? So you can have a comprehensive audit, or you can take a component. So we are talking with an organization right now in Curacao, and this will get going maybe by the end of this quarter. And they're saying, we're not interested in all the compliance stuff. We have people who are already taking care of those and so on. We are more interested in how is HR enabling the organization to create the culture that we want to exist for this organization. Now, that's a really good question. Is HR doing what it needs to do to build the type of organization culturally that we want? And of course, I had to ask, okay, so culturally, what do you want? Do you know what that is? And they said, we're still fleshing it out. So now what we will do is say, okay, if you want this type of culture, HR should look like this. How do you look? So again, it's a comparison against a standard.
And you see now, of course, so the organization's benefits, the individual benefits as well. What areas would you say, in your experience, should be particularly focused on?
Well, it really depends on the organization itself. I mean, if you have an advanced HR practice within the organization, then very often a lot of the compliance issues are taken care of. But compliance is usually one of those things that organizations pay attention to, because if you run afoul of the law, then you open yourself up to litigation. And that has all kinds of implications, financial, but also just in terms of how the organization is viewed in the market as an employer, whether you can attract the best people. So compliance is always a big one. As I said, in that particular case, this organization says, we're good on the compliance. We already focus there. We get a report every month or every 3 months, whatever it is. So we don't want to focus there. So, but compliance is a big one. I think another big one is engagement. You know, because there's a correlation between how engaged people are and how the organization performs generally. There's a correlation between engagement and almost anything within the organization, including safety, etc. So engagement is a big one. And for HR, it wouldn't just be how well engaged people are. You can measure that by doing an engagement study or survey, but it would then be how is HR tooled and behaving, practicing, enabling others to create the level of engagement. I think that's another very, very important one. If I could add one more, and for Trinidad and Tobago, this would be great and important: performance. You know, so how is HR enabling? Because HR doesn't go and measure everybody's performance, but it needs to enable people to do that, enable that performance management, which is an ongoing communication process between employer and supervisor. So how is HR tooling people up and measuring that process as well?
From where it is, as it is right now, do entities see the importance of the HR audit?
Some do. I have found that the more advanced organizations do. And when I say advanced in the Caribbean, that means you're talking about people like your electric utilities, your banks, maybe your telecoms. Those are those bigger ones. In Trinidad and Tobago, some of our gas and oil firms. Some of our multinationals, they do this as a matter of course. You know, so small, the larger, what we call large in the Caribbean, they tend to. Some of the medium-sized organizations, they haven't gotten on that wagon as yet. You know, they're yet to see that as something that's critical. And one of the things I would love to see is that we put it in our legislation.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because the next question would have been who actually conducts the audit, because again, there's that room for not necessarily the most transparency.
Right. So many organizations have an internal audit division or department. So you will find that sometimes they will do some elements of it externally, and it's always better when it's done externally, because you have, you know, clear eyes. You don't have something to, you know, have an axe to grind on an agenda. So as I said earlier, sometimes it's going to be the finance people. your financial auditors will also do some elements of HR, right? And again, they'll compare against a standard. And there are HR auditors. There are people who are certified in auditing HR, so they know what to look for, and they've either been HR practitioners or strategic HR practitioners, and they go in and look very carefully. And of course, if you know what to look for, if that's your area of specialization, then your eyes are different. You're able to gaze differently. So it really depends. In our case, we are external to organizations, so whenever we do it, we've been called in to bring specific eyes, usually to look at something very specific, or, as I said in that particular organization's case, to look at the entire comprehensive HR practice.
Post an audit, before we get to the legislation, post an audit with a company, what benefits do you see immediately afterwards, or is it a case of something that's delayed, maybe takes a little while?
In terms of benefits, so when we conduct HR audits, what we will do is we'll produce a pretty comprehensive report.
Okay.
And one of the things I always say to CEOs, because often we're having that conversation with the CEO, is this is not meant to say, aha, I got you.
Right.
It's more meant to say, here's another pair of eyes. We're able to see things maybe you're not looking at, or find things that you didn't find. And the HR manager, HR director, whatever it is, can improve. That's what this is about. So it is about improvement. The benefits really depend on how quickly the organization wants to go. So we have one client in the Dutch West Indies who said, okay, let's do this, let's get the report. Got the report, we did a nice matrix for them to show where they're strong and where they're weak. And the CEO said to me, he said, okay, so what I need you to do is to work with us over the next 3 years. And I need these ones in the red, I need them to be green.
Yeah.
So, we're gonna start with the low-hanging fruit, get some movement on that and so on. But so it really depends on the organization. I mean, our work ends when we've done the report, we've done the risk analysis, we've produced the report, we've presented it to the manager, the CEO, whomever we're talking to. Sometimes it's the subcommittee of the board for human resources will ask us to do a presentation. And in one case, we actually had to go all the way up to the Council of Ministers in an organization because it was a state entity and they had some major problems and so on. So it really depends there, but it really depends on how quickly the leadership of the organization wants to work and move on those things.
All right, now let's go to that critical point, legislation and the HR audits.
So it is legislated for many organizations that you must conduct a financial audit. Of course, we know of cases here in Trinidad and Tobago where no audits were done for periods of time, but we shan't go into
No, we shall not.
That doesn't mean it's right. They should have done produced those reports and done the audits. I remember speaking with our HRMAT president, and she said to me, Richard, a lot of organizations would never do this unless the legislation says you should. Now, if there's legislation that says you must pay people fairly, if there's legislation that says you must treat them as equal opportunities, for example, we should have safe working workplaces. I could just go down a very long list.
So before we get to that long list, if you're just joining us, we're speaking to Richard Solomon. He's the Managing Director of the Development Consulting Center, and we're touching on a topic that we don't necessarily see out in the forefront, speaking about the HR audits. A critical conversation because, of course, for many, there is still that gray area where it comes to human resources and where they stand, of course, while we do understand and recognize that HR is there for us as employees. Many times you do see people just seeing it in a bit of a different angle. But now we're getting to a critical conversation of the possibility of legislation, because sometimes we don't necessarily see people being quite willing to, let's say, bend.
Right. I mean, let's understand what we're working on here. Everyone wants to count the money. I'm all for that. The number one operating cost for most organizations is going to be the people cost, except airlines, and that's going to be fuel. Right? The next is going to be people. So obviously, there is a financial implication here. Very often when organizations get into trouble and they end up in the courts and so on, and they have to spend money because of what, and we've seen several cases. Interestingly, our Equal Opportunities Commission recently, they have to pay out some money and so on. It's because of their people practices. And therefore, I'm saying that auditing HR is going to support everything else in your organization, the finance, the safety, the productivity, everything else. It makes sense to make this a legislative requirement.
Yeah. It definitely does make
It
sense
does.
to make it a legislative requirement because, I mean, from what you've said there as well, it's something that it trickles down.
Yeah.
That's really what I'm getting from this conversation this morning, particularly. One of the things that we need to go back to is you were just giving us a case in the Dutch Caribbean, right, that you've been working with, and the fact that after doing, let's say, your end of it,
Yes.
they said, well, you know what, we need you for 3 years.
Right.
3 years is a bit of a long time.
Yeah.
But how long does an audit actually take?
We could get an audit done in 3 weeks. Yeah, the audit itself doesn't take a long time. I mean, depending on how quickly we want to go. And as I said to a general manager recently, we can go faster. Just tell us you want to go faster. We bring on more people. And we, it costs you more, but we can go faster. So the audit itself is not the difficult part in terms of time, but the fixing.
Yeah.
So in that particular organization, they've got a lot of pieces missing,
Right.
a lot of policies that do not exist. Their HR department is not well structured. There's a whole long list of problems. And because of the nature of their problems, they want this thing to work over a period of time. We will not be there consistently or continuously for 3 years, but we'll work on one piece, get that into the green, work on another piece, move it out of the red, maybe in the yellow or in the green, and keep working like that over. He estimates 3 years. We'll see.
Richard, I know we're touching also, of course, on the operational side of things with the audit, but would it be feasible to say that post doing an HR audit, you can also see a boost in employee morale?
Yeah, and so this is the thing. I mean, morale and engagement. Remember, HR is that body that holds the people, hires them, promotes them, trains them, demotes them, fires them, takes care of the employee experience throughout the time that they're there. They don't always do it directly, but they are working through managers and others. And so anything that HR can do to positively improve or impact how managers and others work with their people and the experience that people are having in the organization should move the engagement and the engagement needle. So yes, and morale, if you want to use that term, motivation, if you want to use that term, but it should move the needle.
So we're looking at just really as a domino effect of benefits when it comes to having an HR audit. But do you think it's feasible or do you think legislation to cover this is feasible? Is it something that can be done?
Quite honestly, I mean, it's legislation. We can write a law for almost anything. If you think about it, we can write a law for anything. So why can't we say if your organization is of a particular size, a particular structure, ownership structure, then you must have an HR audit performed at least once a year. We've said it for finances. You know, what's the difference between people and money? Well, money is a lot easier to deal with, you know, because it doesn't talk back, etc. Part of the reason we should. Because money is a lot easier to deal with. It's a lot more transparent. Humans are a little bit nebulous, you know, not as clear. And therefore, I think many times people think, well, we can't measure that. Or maybe people ask, can we really measure that? We can measure almost anything about people. We just need to have the right instruments for measurement. So I think it's quite possible. I don't think it's a difficult piece of legislation would be. I mean, this is not my area, writing legislation. But I think it's quite possible. We've done it for HSE.
Yeah.
We've done it for HSE, you know, and there are parts of the Caribbean that doesn't really have any legislation as it relates to safety. Some are coming on. We've done it for procurement, you know, so why not? It's quite possible.
It is, yeah, definitely. I mean, when you put it like that, it is. But in the interim, are there any global standards that should be adhered to for HR audits, or is it a case of on a case-by-case basis?
There are a few what I call taxonomies for HR that really track the employee life cycle from place to, you know, through the entire experience that the employee has. And so there are different standards. ISO has a standard, but there is no one standard. There is no one standard. And I think what's responsible for that is HR is relatively young. It's the second most recent addition to the C-suite. Chief Customer Officer is the most recent, but there are standards. And so what we do typically is once an organization says, okay, we want to do this, we will now look at, do we use a particular standard, one coming out of Europe, one coming out of the United States, or do we use a hybrid? Yeah. Which we can do. Because remember, what we're doing is we're comparing against a standard. So we have to get clear, what is the standard for this cultural one that we're going to be starting later this quarter? And then we go in and find the information that either supports that they're doing it or they're not, not, where are they weak, where are they strong, and say, what do you do to make it better?
I mean, from what you've discussed this morning, hybrid definitely sounds ideal to match our culture as well, because trust and believe, we're quite different in the Caribbean region, to say the least. Richard, before we close our conversation, any closing comments for Trinidad and Tobago?
I don't undervalue the people. This is critical. Don't undervalue how people are treated in the organization. It's going to be either your greatest success or your greatest failure. And so if measuring how people are treated within the organization and whether HR is doing its work is critical, then, and you do that, it will move the needle in a positive direction for all the metrics that we want, including financial performance.
Richard, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's been a pleasure to have you, as always.
Thank you.
Richard Solomon, Managing Director of Development Consulting Center, with us this morning speaking about HR audits. Stay tuned. There's more coming up after this break.